There's a storm across the valley. The clouds are rolling in. The afternoon is heavy on your shoulders. There's a truck out on the 4-lane, a mile or more away. The whining of his wheels just makes it colder.
Welcome to Community Forum. My name is Priscilla Almquist-Olsen, your host today, October 13th, 2022. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome back to our program a friend and a collaborator and a colleague, Kyla Bennett, Dr. Kyla Bennett. Kyla, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me, Priscilla.
Yeah, and not only does she have her doctorate in biology, but she also is an environmental lawyer for PEER, and P-E-E-R, and please tell us what that stands for.
Sure.
And what you do.
Sure. PEER it stands for Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility. We're a national nonprofit based just outside of Washington, D.C., and I am the science policy advisor for PEER. We basically are a whistleblower organization. We support and defend local, state, and federal employees who work in the environmental or public health arena who want to let the public know about things that are going wrong in their agencies and environmental issues that need to be fixed.
Yes, and I've invited Kyla today to talk about toxic chemicals in our daily lives and how to avoid them. And that is especially significant here in Easton because of the PFAS controversy and the almost $10 million treatment plant that we taxpayers are paying for in order to get those PFAS or forever chemicals out of our water. So, and that reminds me, you and I got up and tried to get the PFAS out of one particular place, and that was the playing fields of the high school. And they wanted to put down some artificial turf. So, and they contain PFAS. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, let's start talking about, just so the viewers know what PFAS are. Mm-hmm. PFAS, which stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, is a very large class of chemicals. We don't even know how many are in there because EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, does not have one consistent definition across the entire agency. They say there are anywhere between roughly 6,000 and 12,000 of these chemicals, and right now none are regulated by the federal government, although the EPA just did put in a draft proposal to regulate 3 of them in our drinking water. The state of Massachusetts, however, regulates 6 PFAS. And PFAS are called, as Priscilla said, the forever chemical. And that's because the backbone of each of these thousands of chemicals is made up of a carbon-fluorine bond. And this bond is so strong, it's one of the strongest bonds known to humans. It's really difficult, if not impossible, to break. It does not readily break down in the environment. So these chemicals stay around forever. And the problem is that PFAS are carcinogens. Many of them are carcinogens. They're all persistent. Many are bioaccumulative. And those that we've tested are incredibly toxic. They cause cholesterol problems, obesity problems, kidney and testicular cancer, and big problems with the immune system to the point where they cause more severe COVID-19 and they make vaccines not work as well in you. They're particularly troublesome chemicals for susceptible populations like children, immunocompromised people, and older people. So we really don't want them in our water. We don't want them in our soil or our food. And unfortunately, they are ubiquitous. And we discovered that there were PFAS in Easton's water. I actually discovered it back in 2019. I tested Easton's water thinking that it would be clean and found a pretty high level of PFAS, and I brought that information to the town, and they were incredibly receptive. Our town has been great on this, on the PFAS issue. They have really taken the bull by the horns, and they've gone to DEP, told them we had a problem. They got some money from the state to site and design our filtration plant that should be going in hopefully next year. It will be finalized. But the bottom line is this: we have unacceptable amounts of PFAS in our drinking water. You can't see it, smell it, or taste it. So until the filtration plant comes online in the town of Easton, I strongly urge everybody in town to get their own personal filtration plant that they can have at their kitchen sink, and use that filtered water to make coffee with, to cook with, to drink, to feed your dogs and your cats and your gerbils, because EPA just recently, in June of this year, said that two of the most prominent PFAS, PFOA and PFOS, there is virtually no safe level of these chemicals. In other words, any amount can be detrimental to your health. So for those of you who don't have filters, I would urge you to get them. But as Priscilla alluded to, yes, there is PFAS in artificial turf, which is something else that we discovered at Pier. We tried valiantly at town meeting to get them to not put in the turf field. We were outvoted. The turf field went in. And since that time, we have discovered that about 12 parts per trillion of just the 6 PFAS that the state regulates leach off a brand new field. That amount goes up as the fields weather. So as they age from abrasion, UV light, acid rain, more PFAS goes off, gets in our soil, gets in our drinking water, and unsurprisingly, the 2 wells that we have in town, we have 6 wells, 6 gravel-packed wells in Easton and 1 well field. And of those 7 wells, the 2 that are closest to the 2 artificial turf fields that we have in town, one at Stonehill and one at OA, those are the ones that are most contaminated. So I still think that field should come out. Both of those fields should come out, and we should replace them with natural grass. The town of Sharon, just right next door, just issued a moratorium on artificial turf, and they are putting in their brand new high school, they're putting in an organic grass field to protect their drinking water and Lake Maspog.
Yes, and I think most people don't understand that the way the PFAS chemicals get into the body is through the skin. So when these athletes are rolling around on the turf, whether it's football after a tackle or someone falls playing field hockey, the particles get on their clothes, into their skin, and that's how the transmission of these toxic chemicals happen. So one of the studies I think that's been ongoing is to see how many people who played on artificial turf have gotten cancers and other diseases later in life. Do you know much about that?
I do, actually, and we have, at Pier, we have a big artificial turf campaign. There are actually 3 routes of exposure for PFAS: ingestion through food and water, inhalation through dust, and also, as you mentioned, Priscilla, through dermal absorption. We don't know much about the dermal absorption in athletes. Pier is actually doing a study out in California, thanks to the generous donation of a foundation that gave us the money to do this. We're going to be looking at children's soccer players and see how much PFAS they dermally absorb from playing on these artificial turf fields. But we do know that PFAS is dermally absorbed, and we know this because of our firefighters. And it's appalling to me what's going on with firefighters. The turnout gear that firefighters wear has PFAS in it. We are working very hard to ensure that we get PFAS out of that turnout gear because it's really not necessary. But the cancer rates among firefighters are astronomical. In fact, in 2019, 75% of on-duty firefighter deaths were from cancer. And I have clients who have, firefighter clients who have testicular cancer at very young ages, brain cancer, all sorts of cancers, and they are exposed to this PFAS. It's dermally absorbed through their skin, gets into their bloodstream, and they're also breathing the dust from their turnout gear being stored in the fire stations. And it also affects the communities, because if you think about it, our fire station in Easton, that turnout gear, when it's washed, the water that goes out is, if it's going into a septic, is getting into our soil and our groundwater. If it's going to a wastewater treatment plant, the wastewater treatment plant does not filter out PFAS, and in fact, it can actually create more PFAS. PFAS chemistry is really complicated. It's super complicated, but the bottom line is that these compounds will recombine, and actually the influent, the dirty water coming into a wastewater treatment plant, usually has less PFAS than the water coming out in the effluent because of the formation of more PFAS through the treatment process.
I see, so they're recombining.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You know, you mentioned how important it is to get a water filter system in your kitchen. And you had put that on your Facebook page, I think, some years ago.
I did.
And I saw that, and I went to Lowe's immediately, and you had recommended A.O. Smith, that's A-O Smith, 2-filter water filter. And I have installed that in my kitchen under the sink. You have two options, under the sink, on top of the sink. But I put mine under the sink, and so every 6 months I need to change these 2 filters, and I pick them up at Lowe's, and they cost about $55. So for a year of protection, $110 is a pretty good thing to prevent cancer. And
well worth it. Yeah, I have that same filter, the A.O. Smith dual cartridge, but there is a list on NSF. If you go to your favorite search engine and type in NSF water filters PFAS, you'll come up with a list of filters that are independently tested. And also one of our selectmen here in Easton sells filters that are also approved by NSF to remove PFAS, so that you have a wide variety of options. But again, very, very important. Another reason that Easton and other communities are contaminated with PFAS is because it is in pesticides, which there was an article that just came out a few weeks ago that showed horrifying amounts of PFOS, one of the worst PFAS, in pesticides that are used here in Massachusetts. And the researcher who did the work actually showed that the PFAS from the pesticides gets into the soil and then gets taken up into the vegetables that you're eating. So this makes it one of the ways you can avoid PFAS in your food is by eating organic. And we are very fortunate here in Easton to have a fabulous organic farm, Langwater Farm. I have a CSA share there. I go there all the time, try to get as many vegetables as I can from Langwater. But I understand that that's a very privileged statement, because a lot of people can't afford organic vegetables. That being said, Trader Joe's, Aldi's, and even Walmart are now big sellers of organic vegetables and fruits. And if you can, I would urge you to buy as organic as possible. It's better for your health, it's better for the environment, and it will minimize your risk of ingesting PFAS, because of course organic farms cannot use these synthetic pesticides that contain PFAS.
And that brings us to the fruit industry too. Apples, for example. So if you buy non-organic apples, you really need to peel the skin.
You do. Peeling helps a little bit, but it can get in leafy vegetables like lettuce and kale and things like that. The other source of PFAS in vegetables is through biosolids. And for those of you who don't know what biosolids are, basically it's human waste from a wastewater treatment plant where the water has been removed and it's sold and packaged as fertilizer. So when you go to your Lowe's or your garden center and you're buying fertilizer, make absolutely sure that you are not buying fertilizer that is made from biosolids, because there are tens of thousands of parts per trillion of PFAS in these biosolids that people put on their gardens. And again, organic farms are not allowed to use biosolids, so that's another reason that organic fruits and vegetables have less PFAS in it than conventionally grown.
Wow. So how do we, besides a water filter and besides buying organic, there are other products that have household products and personal products which have toxic chemicals in them. So talk a little bit about that, if you would. How do we avoid these chemicals?
You have to be an educated consumer, is the bottom line. And that's not always easy because there's a lot of greenwashing going on. I go to the store and I see nonstick pans that say PFOA free. Well, PFOA is just one of the 12,000 PFAS out there. So it's great that they don't have PFOA, but chances are if it's nonstick, it's got one of the others in there, and none of them are good. So I totally avoid nonstick pans. Nonstick pans, as convenient as they are very bad for you. I use cast iron that's well seasoned or stainless steel. That's the only type of pan we have in our house. So nonstick pans have PFAS. A lot of dental floss has PFAS. It's easy to find brands that don't have it. In fact, if you go to, your favorite search engine, I use Google, and type in PFAS-free consumer products, there is a website that will come up that has all sorts of PFAS-free rain gear. For example, your rain gear, a lot of it has PFAS in it. I use a company called Jack Wolfskin to buy, it's not real wolfskin, I'm vegan, I don't do that. But they have rain gear that has no PFAS in it. So anything that's waterproof, stain-proof, or non-stick has PFAS, virtually everything. So carpets that are stain-proof, your couches, sunbrella fabric for your outdoor furniture has PFAS. A lot of rain gear, baseball gloves, guitar strings, makeup, a ton of makeup has PFAS in it to make it waterproof. A lot of these things are just items of convenience. And to me, if you're thinking about cancer, convenience, would I rather have waterproof mascara and get cancer, or be cancer-free and have my mascara run? I would opt for the running mascara and cancer-free. So what we're trying to do is get the government agencies at the state and or federal level to start banning PFAS in products, in artificial turf, in pesticides, in makeup, in food packaging. That's someplace else that you will see a lot of PFAS in. If you go to Burger King, which you shouldn't, but if you go to Burger King or McDonald's, the burgers are greasy, and they have these paper wrappers that have PFAS to prevent the grease from leaking out into your lap when you're eating in your car. That will leach into your food, and it can be incredibly dangerous. So some companies are starting to switch, like Whole Foods and Sweet Greens are trying to get rid of PFAS in their food packaging. But even things like if you go to the bakery at Shaw's or White's or wherever, some of those wax papers, not all, some of those wax papers have PFAS. I use the brand If You Care parchment paper, which is the one brand we know does not have PFAS in it. And I use that parchment paper to make cookies or bake things in my oven, so I don't have to use nonstick pans.
And all of these things are accessible from Amazon, for example.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you can also buy them in some stores.
You can.
Yeah.
If You Care. That's easy to remember.
Yeah.
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 So where can the viewers find, is there a website that lists all of these products that you're talking about?
There's one website that lists some things like backpacks and camping gear and rain gear and things like that. That's the one I mentioned before. But as far as your everyday products, there really isn't. There are some, there's a woman who goes by the name Mama Vation, I think, and she tests a lot of products. She tests toilet paper and tissues and wax paper and paper plates and things like that. So you can find some information there. But really the bottom line is you have to be an educated consumer. You have to reach out to these companies and say, hey, do you use PFAS? And oftentimes you'll get these messages back that say, we don't use PFOA, or we only use C6 PFAS, and that C6 refers to 6-carbon PFAS, and that's because the two most prominent PFAS, PFOA and PFOS, have 8 carbons, so they're considered C8 PFAS. But the C6 PFAS are just as dangerous, so that's kind of meaningless. You have to make sure that these companies use 0 PFAS, none. I don't care how long the chain of carbons are, you just have to make sure that they don't use any. And companies are starting to market their products. I was with some friends this weekend outdoors, and we had a little picnic, and they brought paper plates from Whole Foods, and it said right on the label, these plates are PFAS free. Now, whether they are or not, I don't know. A reporter out in California is actually testing them, because I tweeted it and she reached out to me and said, where can I get those? I want to test them. So she's testing them, we'll find out. But you're not supposed to lie when you're marketing things like that, so hopefully they are PFAS free. So these companies are starting to be more savvy, and they're giving people what they want, which are PFAS free products. But until all the companies are doing this, you as a consumer have to be very careful. And also you as parents, if you have your children playing on these artificial turf fields, people accuse me of being a fearmonger, but honestly, the cancer rates among athletes, particularly soccer goalies, is much higher than, and these are children, young people, much higher than other players, and it's because they spend more time on the ground getting this stuff all over their body. It gets into open sores and can get absorbed directly into your bloodstream. The microplastics, I just learned, I didn't know this. I was astonished to learn just earlier this week that small microplastics can be absorbed through your skin. And a lot of these microplastics, especially microplastics coming off of artificial turf, have PFAS in them. So that's another way that they can get into your body. So if you have an athlete playing on these artificial turf fields, they should remove their clothes before they get into your car. They should take a shower the minute they get home with filtered water. And you should make sure that they're not scattering this stuff all over your house, because you're all going to be breathing it and eating it and getting it dermally absorbed if you're not careful.
Wow, that's amazing. And it's information which most people have no concept that it exists. So do you have any other parting words of wisdom?
Yes.
I mean, you've given so many words of wisdom here, and we appreciate it so much, Kyla.
I do. You know, a lot of people I see on Facebook, people do call me a fearmonger, and they say, my water tastes fine. Well, yeah, it does. But a lot of toxic chemicals are odorless, they're tasteless, and they're colorless. So you can't tell that they're there. A lot of other people say, well, you're talking about parts per trillion. That's, you know, 1 grain of sand in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. That's what the producers, the manufacturers of PFAS always like to say. It's only 1 grain of sand for an Olympic-sized swimming pool. But it's toxic at those levels. These chemicals are so dangerous that EPA says that 4 parts per quadrillion should be your lifetime limit. Quadrillion. Here in Easton, we have in one of our wells over 50 parts per trillion, which is far more than 4 parts per quadrillion. So we really, really need to be careful. And until the technology of taking this stuff out of our food and our water and our consumer products catches up with the science of what we're learning of how awful these chemicals are, you have to advocate for yourself. You have to ask the right questions of people who make consumer products, people who sell even meat and dairy. It's in milk. Some farms in Maine had to shut down because the milk was so contaminated with PFAS. Out in New Mexico, a farmer had to slaughter I think he had 3,000 or 6,000, some very large number of cows. He had to slaughter his cows because they were so contaminated with PFAS, and then he could not dispose of the bodies because the cows themselves are hazardous waste. So I like to liken PFAS contamination to climate change. If we stopped emitting carbon dioxide into our atmosphere tomorrow, if we stopped burning fossil fuels tomorrow, the level of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere is going to stay level for probably tens, if not hundreds of years before it slowly starts coming down. It's the same thing with PFAS. If we turn off the tap of PFAS contamination tomorrow, because they're forever chemicals, they're going to stay in our soil and water for years, for generations, before they start slowly breaking down. So it is incumbent on you to be careful, to minimize your risk by eating organic, by not buying products that have PFAS in it, by minimizing your exposure on those artificial turf fields, by not using pesticides that contain PFAS, and unfortunately, a lot of them do. You shouldn't be using pesticides anyway, but that's a whole nother story. But unfortunately, the burden is on you to protect you and your family. Do not take this for granted. Do not say, oh, these are small amounts. Do not trust your government, because just because EPA hasn't regulated them yet does not mean they're safe. They are going to be regulating them starting this year. Mass DEP is doing a great job, I think, of trying to protect us, but they're still far behind the 8 ball, and just because there's so many out there and they're so ubiquitous. So you need to advocate for yourself, because the government is not yet doing it for you.
Yeah, that's a sad footnote on this terrible situation. And I want to thank you so much for coming and enlightening us, telling the audience here in Easton what they're up against, and that you're sounding the alarm, and you should, and we all should be much more aware of what we're buying, what we're putting into our bodies, on our bodies, and those turf fields. Those little kids who are rolling around in that artificial turf, that's the thing that really bothers me the most, because they have a whole life to live, and many of them are not going to get that opportunity. So I thank you again so much, and I know you're going to come back and give us some updates on all this research at Kyla. And I want to thank you personally for all of your devotion, dedication, and trying to bring justice to the world and to the health of all human beings. Your
Thank
work
you.
is wonderful. And for you out there, this Eastern woman has been on, I think, CNN and MSNBC. Maybe you've seen her on television. Why? Because she is a noted expert. So when you hear her speak, you are hearing the truth. I just want you all to know that. And she is admired and welcomed by people all over the world. So thank you, Kyla, for coming to my program here in Easton, the Community Forum, and continue your wonderful work.
Thank you so much for having me, Priscilla. I enjoy coming. I'll be happy to come again and fill you in when EPA comes out with their new regulatory standards, and DEP is tightening up theirs. And hopefully we'll have a ban on artificial turf containing PFAS and a ban on pesticides that contain PFAS next year.
Yes, so hopefully we'll be following Sharon's example on banning artificial turf.
Absolutely.
Okay, take care. Thank you everyone for watching. Priscilla Almquist-Olsen wishing you all well. Take care until next time.